Welcome to another unpopular opinion series. This is podcast style review from me, Pete Meat, and today I'm gonna talk about Men of Steel and the reason why I loved this movie. Man of Steel was one of the very interesting cases a lot of where the opinion is extremely polarized. On the one hand, we have a lot of people who really liked it. On the other hand, we have people who think this does major dishonest to the character of Superman. Um, so, what do I think of it? I think it's one of the best comic book movie ever made. T- right now, it's on the top three, along with Logan, Dark Knight Rises, and then Man of Steel. So why do I like it? It has something to because this film speaks to me on a very personal level. When I so I'm gonna tell a little bit about my own story. Um, when I was a kid, I moved to Switzerland, to Europe at a very early age, and then I came back to China, and I felt myself is misplaced. I felt a lot of things were out of place for me. In fact, throughout my life, I never felt anywhere is any in place for me. And just as I about to get used to life in China, I moved back to Europe again, and then I moved back to United States. So throughout the film, I have experienced a lot of loneliness and anxiety because I have trouble making friends. People don't speak to me in the culture, and I was spending most of the time trying to get used to the language and environment rather than making a life of my own. When I got to US, at first it's the same feeling, but then I met a group of I met a group of friends who saved my life. If it hasn't been for them, I don't know what kind of place I would be not today. For the first time in my life, I feel confidence, I feel love, and these friends of mine has become more of a family to me, and they were very important for me. Um, and till this day, I still have contact with them, and they have been a crucial part of my life. And if any of you hear this, I just want to say, out of the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for supporting me all these times. I know sometimes I might have give you guys hard times, but you guys are very important to me. So how does it work with Man of Steel? Well, Man of Steel has the same the journey Superman goes was almost a reflection of my journey. He came from a planet that was destroyed, and then when he started off, he has the powers that people don't understand, that people were afraid, and he has no one to turn back to apart from his parents. And then when his father died, he lost all sense of purpose, and then he started traveling around the world. And then when he realized he has power, that comes earned for me. So the whole journey for him is acceptance of people around him. He's young, he's prone to anger, and he's very human. That's the best thing about this version of Superman. He is very human. I didn't like the 1979 Superman version because he's like a very joyful, way too joyful for me. We live in the world where we have many people from all over the world from every ethnicity and from every single background that we can imagine. And so conflict and miscommunication is more often than ever. And I think we need an updated version for Superman. And this version is perfect. He has powers, but he couldn't use it because that will make him alienated. And some people say like, that's just an excuse for him not saving people. But I'm telling you this, like for anyone who has been there, I know I have, being different is actually a pretty scary thing. If you like something different than other people, if you have something other people don't have, there will be fear and there will be doubt, and then you will be isolated or even cast away. That happens more often than you think. And the way Superman goes through is it's very realistic in my book. Some people have problems when Superman's dad was telling him, when Superman was asking like, oh, so we just should let them die? And then his dad said maybe. And that's generated a lot of controversy. Like some people were saying like, oh, his dad just don't want him to save people. I see it in a different way. Remember in Spider-Man Homecoming when Aunt May saw the robbery and she told Peter Parker, you see it, you run the other way. I think this is the same thing happens here for two reasons. One, we do see Superman has power, but we do not know what extent of his power is. And two, the way people react to the phenomenon when people were suspicious that it was him helping all these people all along. Their first reaction was it was a sign of God, and also which reminds me of another thing. Some people say the film was very religious, like Jesus metaphor. Again, I don't see it that way. I will explain a little bit why. Probably I won't expand it. But anyway, I'll just say this clear. I don't think it's a metaphor. I think in the environment that they're living in, I think it's Kansas, I think. The environments they're living in, it's just how people were raised up, how people were believed. It's nothing to do with Jesus, at least the way I see it. And if it's even if it's religious, as people say, people don't seem to have a problem with The Matrix because that film was really Jesus metaphor, like down to the bone. If people have no problem with The Matrix, why are people having problems with Man of Steel? I don't get it. Anyway, that's enough for it. So the second reason, back to the second reason, I think Clark Kent's dad was afraid that people will prosecute him, people will misunderstand him and does more harm to him than he can ever imagine. There's a lot of things in the world that is more complicated than helping people and people will cheer you. No, most of the time when you help people, people will doubt you. And that's the real world we're living in. We're living in a world where miscommunication can happen very, very easily. And so what he was trying to do is trying to protect his children. So no, I don't agree with that criticism. Which leads me to a second thing. And since we're on the topic, lots of people say like, oh, Superman make these people die, with the giant doomsday machine and stuff. Like billions of people die. That never happened in another superhero movie before. Like, oh, this movie is so okay with millions of people die. Something to remember, he didn't cause those destruction. He didn't ask to call. There's an alien invader, and then they started stomping shit. And I think it's good to see those devastation because like I said, this film feels very grounded because if that shit happens, we do see people die. And that makes him, that's is kind of like an unspeakable horror, like something come down from the sky, and what do you do with it? Well, Superman is very, like I said, Superman is very young. He's just learning his power, and then there's a sense of hopelessness in him, especially with this kind of quote unquote dream sequence he had with General Zod. And then Zod said, everyone you know will die. And then he looks fucking terrified. And then so he, and then he, this is, I feel like this is the right occasion for Superman to rise up and use his power because he wanted to protect people. So I don't see how those countless deaths falls on him and on the film writers, because if shit like that happens, this is what really it's this is what destruction will happen. If godlike creatures fight, that is what real life happens. To this I will commemorate I think this is done better than the Avengers, because in the Avengers you see a lot of destruction, but you don't see the consequences until Civil War. To some extent, I feel like the reason for Civil War is more or less influenced by Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, because they both discuss the repercussion of a superhero. And I feel like this is what's the saying, Man of Steel got right. I think it is necessary to show that. And I feel like people were stuck in the 1970s Superman, and they feel like every interpretation should follow it. And because the 1970s version has such a big influence on people, I feel like that was I feel like that is a pretty bad judgment. The only, Batman is different because Batman has always been like the darker tone, and it took Batman and Robin for everyone to forget about what happened in the past and reboot it. So if Batman Begins is okay with it, why not Man of Steel? Also, something I have to say about the action sequences. It was one of the best I've seen out of all the comic book movies, and I didn't say this just because I'm being biased. It is good. It reminds me of lots of Dragon Ball Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super's fight style. There was a lot of long takes. Not a lot of there's rarely any cuts instead of fight scene. They were fast, but not untraceable. How everyone moves, the geographical location, it makes sense. It's easier said than this. What I'm saying, it's pretty easy, but it's hard. It's a problem with films nowadays. I keep on saying the bad influence from Bourne movies. I think Bourne movies are okay, but I don't like the way they shoot the action sequences. And also, most of the action sequences happen way too dark, especially this year. It was The Mummy. And sometimes, with Avengers Age of Ultron, you get fight scenes that's just so many things happen in places that you have to use slow-mo to keep track of what's going on. This film was shot really, really good. If anything, Zack Snyder is great at making good imageries and excellent fight sequences. Something he did really well with 300 and Watchmen. And Man of Steel was it was very unique for the time, because they didn't use slow-mo, they didn't use quick cuts, they used those really flashy fights, but not too flashy that we feel out of place. And like I said, it felt very impactful. Superman was pinned down on the ground for most of the time, and this is what I felt like he should be fighting in his first fight, because he was never trained in combat. The only advantage he has was he knows Earth, like he lived on Earth. It is on his home ground. So this is he is outmatched, but he has his own advantages, and I like how this film make full use of it. Like the way he get used to flying, and then like he used flight to his advantage rather than other people just jumping around. And his fighting style throughout the film improves, and that's what something else I really like. It's not like in Captain America where at first all of a sudden he without after his serum is like, ooh, I'm super strong and I'm super powerful. And it's like, okay, that feels really abrupt. Like, did he receive any training? How come he fights so well all of a sudden throughout the movie without having any concrete training? And here, I feel like Superman improves his fighting style from every single battle. And that's what I really liked about it. Music was amazing. Excuse me. Music in the film was top notch. This is the soundtrack I still listen to nowadays. And when I cry moments, I turn on the Flight soundtrack. I think, and I listen to the beautiful score by Hans Zimmer with piano and then the string instruments. First time when I heard this music, I almost cried. It was just that beautiful. And then the arcade soundtrack was the fight sequence. This is the music I listen to when I go to the gym. It makes me really pumped out. And then with the drums like dong dong dong, fucking adrenaline filled, man. I loved it. Speaking about tear jerking moments, I really like the part where he start learning how to fly. It's one of my favorite moments. Like at first he was really excited that he knows how high he can actually jump, and he's really fun. And then he stumbles, and then he remembers his father's word like they may stumble, they need guide, but you always got hope. I forgot the exact word. And then he took that moment in, and then you see him gripping his fist, the sand rising up, and then you see him fly, and then there's just one long track shot of him flying through the field, and you feel the excitement and joy for him, and the music complements it. It's very, very beautiful. First time I see it, I'm so excited. I really start crying. This is one of the few Superman movie that made me cry. Another moment where I just lost it was when like people were really scared of his power and they start bullying him. And then he was at his lowest point in his life. He went to see his dad, and then like his dad saying like there's a reason why, because we picked up an alien pod. And then he sounds really devastated, and he's like, couldn't I just be your son? And then he said, and then like Kevin Costner was like, you are my son. I was like, oh my god, that's so human. This is the moments I really want. I don't see it in movies nowadays. There is no like movie, especially when Dark Knight came out. Movies were obsessed with having expositions, but not these moments, like these calm little moments. And when they do have these emotional moments, it sounds really scripted, but not in here. Like here, I feel like this is what I would say if I was in the same shoe as him. That's the main thing I really like about this movie, the dialogues. I don't feel pretentious, not for a moment. I never felt for a moment that any of the things they said was pretentious. I felt like if I was in his shoe, those were exactly the same word I would have said. Which reminds me another moment where he came back home, and then this is where his dad already died. So when he came back home and he told his mom like, I found out who my true dad is. And then like his mom was like, oh, that's really good. And then she suddenly turned very sad. And then like Clark was asking her what happened, and then she was like, nothing. It's just like it's good to find your family and stuff. And then like he was like, mom, like you'll always be my mother. I was like, oh man, this is really sweet. There's a lot of moments like that I really like. I don't know, like I don't know why when people start complaining about this movie, they never mention any of those moments. To me, these stuff is what the movie is good. The only problem was Zod. At first, when I see Zod, I felt like he was a little bit over the top, and that could put off some people because he is acting. He is always shouting like, "I will find him." But later on, when I see this film, I start to understand his position. He was military trained, so he was always that kind of hardcore personality, with discipline and with adrenaline motivation. And he has a lot of anger because he was frustrated by the way his people treat his planet, and he fucking lost everything. He was drifted in the middle of nowhere in Phantom Zone. So when he come to Earth, of course he got to be super fucking pissed. And on top of that, Superman's dad stole the Codex, the thing that he values the most. It was he thinks the Codex is the hope of his people. So he will fucking do anything to make his planets whole again. So when I watched this movie again recently, and yes, I watched this movie again. I bought it on Blu-ray. I started to understand his position and what Michael Shannon was trying to do. Oh yeah, the acting. I almost forgot about it. It's great. I really liked it. Especially Henry Cavill nailed the role. When he saw his dad die in the tornado, I was this is some really really sad shit. Like, I felt really sad. Some people would say like, oh, why don't Superman go and save his dad? Because because he's just a normal human being. Like, he's in the hero back then. He was like, he was afraid. And I don't think, honestly, I understand why he didn't want to save, because his dad told him not to use his power because there's so many witnesses, and his mother was in the crowd too. So what he was trying to do is he was trying to protect his mom. And then, like, there was a sense like, and they just had a big fight of Clark Kent saying like, you're not actually my dad. So there's a lot of reason, and there's a lot of things behind his motivation. So yeah, this is another thing, like, I disagree with what people said. So where was I? The acting. Oh yeah, and another thing, Superman killing Zod. It's funny because before I seen this movie, a friend of mine saying like, okay, so there's one thing that might piss you off. And I came out of the movie and was like, this movie is great. Like, I don't know what. He said like, don't you feel Superman killing Zod is out of place? And it's like, no, not really. Like, he did what he has to. Like, it takes one life to save many. And he said like, well, Superman is not supposed to kill. Well, Batman is not supposed to kill, and he fucking kills in Batman v Superman. And I'm fine with that. There's a lot of things people were not supposed to do, but each interpretation can have their own, should take liberty on what they're doing. To me, this version of Superman is not really a role model. He is just a scared young man who is trying to adapt with his power, who's trying to fight against the prejudice of others. So that's what I see. I think other people see as this is not the version of Superman that they wanted. I recently saw Don Walker's review on Wonder Woman. He said David Goyer ruined Man of Steel because it's not human, and because the characters were not humanized because they allow people to die. And I really disagree with that. I see where he's going. I see what his point is, but I don't agree with it. I think being more human is more on a personal level. He also used the example Wonder Woman's, like Wonder Woman saves people. Well, that's because Wonder Woman came to the world with a different purpose. The way she was raised up, she was told that she was the savior of mankind. She was trained by gods. Superman wasn't. Superman was raised by people who live in farm in Kansas. So we cannot. So this is not the same story. This is a whole different set of stories. It's okay for Wonder Woman to be like that because her background was she was trained to be a god. But Superman wasn't trained to be a god. He never received any training. In fact, most of his life he was trying to hide his power because he was afraid like people will be indifferent to him. Wonder Woman was in a different time. She was in a war, and she has people who understand her power. Superman doesn't have that luxury. So we cannot really compare these two movies. So that's it I have to say about Man of Steel. I think this is a really, really good movie. I liked it way better than Dark Knight because for just one thing, the character. There were some critics saying there was a lack of character development. I strongly disagree. I think this whole movie is focused, and I'm thankful for Zack Snyder making this movie because the whole movie is dedicated for building his character and how he become the hero that we need. So, in my opinion, I like it way better than Dark Knight because Dark Knight focused more on the social commentary. Dark Knight has way more social commentary than it needed, too much, in my opinion, and they were not done very well. Hopefully, maybe one day I'll talk about it, but I need to see Dark Knight again to really justify my point. It was one of the most significant comic book movie that I have seen in my life. It has the only flaw was General Zod. I like it better than Wonder Woman because the villain was portrayed a little bit better. I understand the villain's motivation more rather than Wonder Woman's somewhat generic villain. Wonder Woman is still a really good movie, but I think Man of Steel is my favorite of the DCEU movies and probably one of my favorite superhero movie, if not close to top 20 of my favorite movies of all time. And I will defend this movie till the day I die. And I'm not saying it on a whim because like I said, I bought the Blu-ray. I've seen this movie for like at least 5 or 6 times over the past 4 years. And still this movie is not declining on me. In fact, it grows on me even more. I'm gonna give this movie deserves 9.5 out of a 10. It's a very close to a 10 out of 10 movie. I think it is a really great movie. Guys, thank you so much for listening to my review again. Like I said, I might do a Dark Knight, but more likely or not, I'm gonna do a review on X-Men Apocalypse. So keep tuned. And like always, if you like my video, please click like or subscribe. And if you think I'm good, you're pretty good too.